Greetings, YouTubers. Welcome back to my channel. I'm deciding to do something a little different this time. I'm doing a little video commentary on what I painted this afternoon at a place called Sugar House Park in Salt Lake City. It's a beautiful park that has a lot of green space and a pond. And one of the things I'm trying to work on is this idea of simplifying. I find when I get out into the environment, into a landscape, I just see so much that I have a hard time at times, most of the time, identifying exactly what it is I want to try and paint. So here you see me, I've created more or less just try to fill up all the white space of the panel. I later removed that tree. I decided it's too central, trying to work out the drawing. And really, in retrospect, I should have worked out the drawing more specifically before I started in. I'm just always so eager to get going on this that I sometimes bypass the drawing stage. But it was cold today. It was like 31 degrees out there. So I painted for about an hour out there until I couldn't stand it anymore. And then I went inside and painted inside. I used liquid as a medium, so it was mostly dry by the time I got back home. Lots of little adjustments here and there that I'm making. I saw these beautiful mountains out in the distance, and I just thought, gosh, I would love to be able to capture some of that grandeur and the drama of the cloud cover that is there that day. But then the other thing that I'm playing with is this idea of like focal points and having one story to tell, one idea, rather than like every idea that's out there. There was a sunset and there were beautiful trees, beautiful mountains. So you see me here at this point still working on this idea of what is the story I want to tell. I think all of this could be pretty well solved by maybe doing some thumbnail sketches first of the landscape and of the ideas that I want to tell, or at least just getting in there a little more specifically with a charcoal drawing on the board, or just even a drawing with paint on the board. I did do that, but I was a little impatient and just got going right away. So I'm working out there. I'm adding some highlights to these trees and adding some shadows. And later you see me change all of this. I realized that the painting at this point seems to really sort of drop off to either side with a central peak, which is just compositionally not great. So I think I worked to make some of that better later. So I'm just plugging away, looking at the shadows of the clouds, trying to create some of that drama that I was seeing. There wasn't any directional pathway into the painting. It's a park with lots of grass, and it's hard sometimes for me to find some sort of directionality, or some level of composition in something as free ranging as these parks are. So still working on that idea of maybe just taking a section of the park next time, or just a single tree or a grouping of trees rather than something quite so big. Trying to save my white highlights for the very end to give it punch, otherwise the tonal values get really blown out. And that's something I've definitely learned from various YouTube artists. So this is me now back at home, and the painting is pretty well dry. I'm working now with water mixable oil paints. I was working originally with Gamblin outside and liquid and Gamsol, and now I'm just working with water mixable oils and water. I think the two work fine together. I think I can paint over gambling sort of regular oils with water mixable oils, but someone can tell me if that's incorrect. So I'm looking at, when I got it back home, I realized that all the values were really squished together, and there wasn't much differentiation between the sky and the mountain and the ground plane. So I'm trying to start with the furthest thing away, the mountains and the sky, and working my way forward, thinking, gosh, let me go ahead and really up the contrast between the mountains and the foreground trees. The mountains were beautiful out there. They really receded in distance and from me, and I really enjoyed the process of trying to capture that. I realized here that I was working to differentiate the distant trees from the more foreground trees. They were essentially the same value. I adjust this several times, as you'll see in the coming minutes of this painting. I had a really great time working on this painting and just continuing to always see new things that I wanted to fix and adjust. Let me know what you think of the progress that I've made, or the explorations that I'm engaged in here. I realized later on in the painting that these trees I'm working on now are nearly as tall as the foreground trees, so I tried to cut those down, and it was just a drawing error. And I was looking at making those more recede later on in the painting. Adding some very light yellows in the distance here. One of the things I've learned recently is how much of a cooling agent white is, and that as things come forward, the colors obviously become more saturated. But a mistake I was making for a long time, and still sometimes do, is thinking of white as a color that can be used in mixtures in the foreground, and it just makes things chalky, and it actually cools things off, and anything that's cool obviously is pushed further back. So I'm working on trying to become more sophisticated in my use of cool and warm colors. The other thing that I was playing with in this painting is this idea of warm light creating cool shadows, and cool light creating warm shadows. So we've got this warm light to the upper right-hand section of the painting, and I wanted to use that to effectively create cool shadows in the mountains as well as on the foreground plane. There was some peaks of really beautiful blue that was coming through some of those clouds. I made up this pathway leading through. This looks more like sort of a field, obviously, than where I actually was. I really edited quite heavily what I was looking at, but just decided to go with it. I think there are several schools of thought there in terms of how much can you edit and how much do you need to stay true to what's actually there. And I find myself veering much more towards feeling the permission to edit what's in front of me, to be inspired by it, but to essentially use it as editable raw material. Where that balance is between editing it completely so that you just end up painting something that's just absolutely not there, I think is something I'm still very curious about and wondering about. I'm curious about what other painters out there in the world do in terms of reference material, either on site or with photographic images, and how much you stay true to what you're seeing, and how you veer away from it. I think it's a fascinating process. I really enjoyed creating those bright white highlights of the mountains and tried to differentiate those with the blue shadows, the shadow side of the mountains. And as you can see, I'm trying to add a little more specificity to these two foreground trees, hopefully leading the eye in to that focal point of the mountains. There was outside this beautiful. It was the middle of the day, but the angle of the sun was such that it created this beautiful sunset-like effect. So I had a great time looking at that. Anyway, here's the finished painting. Very close up, obviously, at this point. Just lots of thick brush strokes, particularly with the highlights and the lighter values, and thinner paint applications with the darker values. But it looks very impressionistic and almost abstract up close like that, which I always find really fascinating. After I finished the painting, I added a few more details. I cut the mountains down or rather the trees down on the right-hand side, and tried to give a little more perspective to what we were seeing. So anyway, hope you enjoyed this video. If you have any thoughts or questions or ideas, please feel free to share. Sending my best to everybody, and take good care, stay creative, and we'll see you in the next one.